Chapter 18. The Underground Cell. More running steps came closer and stopped outside the bushes. "Come out of there!" ordered a harsh voice. Nancy's heart sank. The speaker was Adam Thorne. Knowing resistance was futile, she crept from the brush and stood up in the glare of a powerful flashlight. In the darkness just beyond, Nancy could hear the dog snarling and her captors breathing heavily. "It isn't the old lady," came Miss Tyson's voice. "It's Nancy Drew." Adam Thorne growled. "What? I thought we'd knocked her out of action." Miss Tyson said in a worried voice. "That's what Tar and Jackson reported. Tar himself pushed her—" "Quiet!" snapped Thorne. "She's tricked us. Take her to the house. We'll lock her up." Quick as lightning, Nancy plunged out of the light and desperately raced down the hill. Taken by surprise, her captors hesitated, then pounded after her, the dog barking furiously. Blinded by the sudden change from light to darkness, Nancy stumbled and fell. An instant later, the Great Dane leaped on her. "Grab that leash!" shouted Thorne. The dog was yanked back. Then someone jerked Nancy to her feet. "We'll take her to the house," panted Thorne. With the ex-lawyer in the lead, flanked by the nurse and the attendant, and guarded in the rear by the gatekeeper and his dog, Nancy was marched to the mansion. Bell was waiting in the main hall. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Where's Mrs. Eldridge?" "We haven't found the old fox yet," Thorne answered. "This is the Drew girl I warned you about." Bell's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by trespassing on private property?" "I meant no harm," Nancy replied truthfully. Thorne snorted scornfully. "She's been spying. It's your fault, Bell. I told you not to bring Dr. Spire here. If the old woman's shoulder was dislocated, you should have let it stay that way. Too bad you aren't a real doctor," he added unpleasantly. "You could have said it yourself." "Never mind that," Miss Tyson put in sharply. "How did she get in here?" "Luther, bring the gatekeeper, quickly," Bell ordered. "Just how did you get in, Miss Drew?" "I came in at the entrance," Nancy replied. "The Larkspur is beautiful. I'm not interested in flowers. I think—" Bell checked himself. He turned to Adam Thorne and spoke in an undertone, but Nancy, straining her ears, heard him say, "Password to Larkspur Lane," before their voices became hushed. After a few minutes, the attendant appeared with the gateman. "Jones, have you ever seen this young woman?" Bell demanded, glaring at the man standing before him. "No, sir," the guard declared, not recognizing Nancy dressed in her own clothes. "Did anybody come in by the gate tonight?" Bell asked sharply. Nancy saw fear flicker in the man's eyes as he met Bell's hard stare. Through no fault of his own, the gateman had let intruders into the grounds. Jones swallowed. No, Chief," he said. "Nobody came in or out." A wave of relief swept over Nancy. No alarm would go out for Mrs. Eldridge. The gang would continue to think she was hiding on the grounds. "All right," Bell said. "Get back to the gate." Then, turning to Thorne, he said, "Let's continue this in my office." Miss Tyson grinned maliciously as she prodded Nancy along and into a large, luxurious room. A thick green carpet covered the floor, and in the center stood a large mahogany desk. The walls, paneled in a rich-looking wood, were hung with costly oil paintings. "Shut the door, Luther," Bell ordered. Bell seated himself behind the desk, motioning Nancy to stand opposite him. There was tense silence for a moment. Then Bell reached for a desk telephone. "I am going to call the police, Miss Drew, and turn you over to them on a charge of trespassing, breaking, and entering with attempt to steal." I wish you would, Nancy replied. If it is possible, over that dummy telephone. Didn't I tell you she was sharp-eyed? Thorne scolded. You can't fool her. Follow my advice and put her away. This is a waste of time. What do you mean? Do you wish to have me summon the police? Belle blustered. Why do you call this a dummy telephone? Because, in answer to your first question, I should be happy to be escorted from here under police protection, Nancy retorted. I know the telephone is a dummy because there are no... She checked herself abruptly. No use proving her powers of observation. See here, Nancy Drew, Belle said, pointing a finger at her. Stop all this talk and tell me how you entered these grounds. And why. I know all about you. Sylvan Lake is a long distance from here, and you did not walk. There are various ways of traveling. Belle, I'm telling you, it's just foolishness to try to match wits with this girl, Thorne put in. I know a way to make her talk. And what's more, I'm sure her illustrious father will pay plenty to get his precious daughter back. An excellent idea, Thorne, Belle said with an evil smile. What would you suggest we do first? Put her in the cistern, said Thorne. I guess a couple of days without food or drink down in the dark and cold with the rats and spiders will make Miss Drew answer any question we ask. Miss Tyson laughed harshly, looking straight at Nancy to see if she winced at the prospect. That will take some of the snap out of her, she said. A shiver went down Nancy's spine, but she did not change expression. Belle's cold eyes studied her carefully. You've caused us a lot of trouble, he said softly. Because of you, we had to give up our other headquarters. My partner, Mr. Tooker, will not overlook that very readily. Belle toyed with a sharp-pointed letter opener on his desk. Miss Tyson spoke up. The pigeon keeper guessed she had found that bird, kept it, and then followed it to Tooker's. Now I'm sure he was right. Only from the message that pigeon carried could she have learned the password. And I still say she couldn't have entered without it. Luther cleared his throat. But Joan said, He was lying, Miss Tyson broke in. Where's the car you came in? She asked Nancy. Nancy thought it best to keep stalling. The farther away Bess George and Mrs. Eldridge got, the safer they would be. Nancy smiled. Why don't you search the grounds for the car? That's enough, snapped Belle. Take her away. Nancy knew she was in a hopeless predicament and reasoned that more was to be gained by strategy than by a desperate attempt to break loose. As she was marched out of the room, she heard Belle say, The disappearance of the Eldridge woman and the Drew girl showing up have me so upset I can't think. I'm going upstairs and tell Adolph. Let him handle this. It's dynamite. Do as you please, Thorne said coldly. Nancy, her arms pinned behind her back, was shoved out onto the porch and toward the buildings beyond the house. Just outside the pigeon loft, Thorne stooped and jerked at an iron ring in the ground. It was attached to a round steel lid about 3 feet in diameter. Beneath it gaped a black hole. Well, down you go, Nancy Drew, Thorne laughed. Nancy looked around desperately. There was no escape. As the nurse pushed her, the trapped girl was forced to start down a swaying, flimsy wooden ladder into the dark, damp hole. Down, down, 10 or 12 feet Nancy went, until she could feel the slimy bottom under her feet. This is worse than I bargained for, she thought ruefully. The ladder was jerked up and Thorne called, Don't worry, you may have it back. There was a series of splitting noises, and pieces of the ladder came raining down around Nancy's head. As she threw up her arms to protect herself, she heard Thorne laugh sardonically. Then the lid clanged shut. End of chapter 18.